Hey there. Welcome back to another episode of The Writing Life. I'm your host, John Hartness. I am a professional fantasy and science fiction writer. I'm the founder and publisher of Falstaff Books, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I am a guest member of the YouTube and podcast show Authors and Dragons. I'm a professional editor, professional writer, publisher, all these kinds of things. And today I've moved from our backyard construction site studio where I was sitting on a toilet left over from some home renovations to a stump in my backyard because the light's better and it's just kind of pretty out here. So I'm gonna get some sun, get some vitamin D. Maybe that little stray kitty from who's walking around in my neighbor's yard will come visit. Kitty, kitty, kitty. Kitty, kitty. Yeah, probably not. So it is April 9th, I think, when I'm taping this. And usually these videos are about how to make a living as a writer, how to get published, how to write better. But today I want to talk about influences on your writing, some of mine, and share some of my earliest published work with y'all. I never really thought I was going to be a novelist. My life and career have taken some weird turns to get to this place where I make a living writing vampire books and demon hunter stories. But I've always been a storyteller. And one of the reasons for that is that music has always been a huge part of my life. My brothers and sister were significantly older than me growing up. So when I was born, they were finishing up high school or starting college. And that means that as I started middle school and high school, I got all their old records and I got all their old music, and they introduced me to things like the Allman Brothers and Clapton and all the Southern singer-songwriter music that I love still today. So all of that stuff is a huge influence on the way that I write and the way that I tell stories. So when I decided to start writing fiction, I wrote my first novel, The Chosen, in a fit of pique and spite and irritation. And I wrote the book and realized I had no idea what to do with it. So I spent a year after writing The Chosen. Man, that breeze is chilly. It's chilly this morning in North Carolina. So I wrote that book and had no idea what to do with it. So I spent a year trying to figure out how to get things published. And one of the things I learned is that there are a lot of outlets for publishing poetry. I started writing poetry when I was in 3rd grade because we had a writing assignment that you could write a 1-page story or like a 10-line poem. Being lazy all my life, I decided to write a poem instead and wrote poetry from the age of 8 all the way through college. Plenty of drug-addled, maudlin, navel-gazing college poetry that will never see the light of day. But then I stopped writing altogether, and then I started a poker blog, and then it turned into a bloggy blog. And I wrote a little poetry there. But when I decided to try and learn about getting things published, I knew I could write poetry quickly. So I started writing poetry, thinking, well, can't be that hard to get it published. Well, I was right. I was very fortunate in that I found markets that were willing to publish my poetry, and then I learned something else about writing poetry. It does not pay anything. Like literally, I think I earned $100 from writing poetry in the 2 years that I focused on it as my creative outlet. And that was from winning a contest. I think it cost me $10 to enter the contest. But eventually I decided to put some of my poetry and some of my short stories together, and I self-published a book. It's called Returning the Favor and Other Slices of Life. It's still available. You can still buy it. Note the old school Amazon KDP stock cover design with the text, and you have the little, you can input your own image here. This is a photo I took on the back deck of a house where we stayed at Merlefest. And then I printed up a bunch of copies of this, and I took it to art fairs and craft shows, and I sold it. And then I published a second book of poetry, also using the stock Amazon cover layout with this one with a bigger photo. This was a picture I took off the observation deck. I want to say it's a rest stop between North Carolina and Tennessee, or maybe it's North Carolina and Virginia. I don't really remember, but I had just gotten a new digital camera and I wanted to check out the telephoto lens, so I zoomed way in on a creek and I took this picture. But I published a couple of books of poetry, and today I just wanted to read some of this and share some of this with y'all to kind of show you where my voice and a lot of my narrative style came from, because a lot of it came from music. And we lost John Prine this week, 2 days ago, maybe. I'm devastated. I'm choked up right now. John Prine's music was foundational to me as a professional writer. Music overall is foundational to me. I don't want to write The Next Name of the Wind. I want to write Romeo and Juliet by Mark Knopfler. I want to write Angel from Montgomery. I want to, the ability of a songwriter to pare the soul of a story down to 3 minutes is just amazing to me. So I wanted to take a few minutes today, excuse me. Look, I'm a weepy bastard when the world's not burning. I cry at long distance commercials, so don't get all worked up about me getting teary-eyed, because that just happens. That happens on days that end in Y. I'm a big emotional guy. But I wanted to take a few minutes and read to you some of my poetry and give you some of the stories behind these pieces and let you know kind of where, this is where I started as a published writer. Let's see. God, the layout on this is terrible. Returning the Favor is a mix of, it's a mix of short stories and blog posts and poetry. Man, some of these I really don't like anymore. But I do like this one. This is called Better Home. I actually did write this in college. This was an assignment, or I wrote the first version of this in college. This was an assignment to take a song lyric, I think it was a song lyric that we had to work from, to take a song lyric and write a poem based on it. It's called Better Home. He set his banjo on a peach crate, picked up a mason jar, tore himself off a slash and said, "Sang for me, Vera." Her voice wavered like a robin's song, high and clear across the smoke-filled room, and everybody drew still as Grandma sang gospel. I was standing by my window on one cold and cloudy day. Granddaddy's fingers skipped along the banjo strings like Mama through a Carolina cotton field, bare feet kicking clods of red dirt while her patchwork dress snagged on branches, snatching notes out of the air like Grandma's song floating through the kitchen while she fixed collards for Sunday dinner. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? The whiskey stole his fingers. Hard living and 12 children stilled her voice. There was no music in them by the time I came along. But every once in a while I played freeze tag with my cousins in the backyard and hid behind the laundry hanging out in the sun to dry, a bird would carry back a hint of melody, and I could hear the song in Grandma's eyes as she stood at the sink washing dishes and watching the kids play in the yard. There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. So my maternal grandparents were the only pair I knew. My father's parents had died before I was born. I had a stepmother on my father's side that I didn't know existed until she died when I was young. She married my paternal grandfather after my dad had left the house, and they were never close, so she was not ever part of my life. But every Sunday, after church, we would come home, we would eat lunch. Frequently, we would watch wrestling on TV, and then we would go visit my mother's parents. And my mother's father terrified me. Not because he was mean to me, but because by the time I came along, he was almost completely deaf and largely toothless and frequently drunk to the point of insensibility. And I didn't know these things. I just knew that he was this loud, bald, scary-looking man that I didn't understand what he said. I never had a relationship with him, and the more I learned about him as I grew older, the more I'm completely fine with this, because he wasn't a great human being. I loved my grandmother. She was a sweet, bird-like little woman, and my grandfather, I believe, played fiddle. I don't know that my grandmother ever sang, but we did play in the backyard around the clotheslines, and I do have a ton of cousins because my mother was the oldest of 12. So there are little pieces of real life that pop up in there. let's see what else we got here. This is called Crying in the Rain. And the interesting thing about this piece is that it was actually inspired by the first season of the TV show True Blood. Spoiler alert, the book's like 15 years old and the TV show was close to that now. The main character's grandmother dies over the course of the season, and I felt like the way they approached the funeral and the very southernness of those death rituals I thought was really good. And coming from older parents, I grew up with the southern death rituals of casseroles and visitations and going and sitting with people in grief, and there is a great sense of ritual about Protestant Southern country death, and a lot of that I touch on a lot of that in a lot of pieces, and this is one called Crying in the Rain. The funny thing about crying in the rain is that you can't tell which is which. I'm sitting on the porch under an overflowing gutter with a clogged downspout as a sheet of water pours over me. Late summer thunderstorm washing away the morning. A miserable yellow dog slinks down the sidewalk, giving me an incredulous look and shake of the head. I hear the intermittent chirp of a baffled blue jay, interspersed with the splatter of raindrops on asphalt. The occasional sound of patent leather through mud puddles tells the story of comings and goings from the house behind me. I hate the rain, but I hate being in there more, dodging platitudes and sandwich platters. And if I see one more goddamn broccoli casserole, I think I'm going to shoot somebody. If you've ever been to a Southerner's home 2 days after someone died, you know exactly what I'm talking about there. That might be the only things I want to read out of this one. The bad part about looking back on 10-year-old writing is that you're looking back on 10-year-old writing. This one, this is Red Dirt Boy. This is a collection of nothing but poetry. God, I guess a lot of the stuff from Returning the Favor is closer to 15 years old at this point, because this was published in 2010, so this is at its best 10-year-old writing. And I can tell that this is an old book that I self-published because I used the white paper and it's so bright. I've switched over and now everything we publish at Falstaff is published on cream paper because I find it much easier to read. And I'm looking at this and just thinking, holy God, that's blinding. The things you learn, and it's the little things throughout a career that I can't put those into a bulleted video or a class. It's just one of the things that I was looking at the fiction and Returning the Favor and realized that I've got the sniffles too, because it's April in North Carolina and the pollen is out of this world. And it's about lunchtime, so that means my Claritin is wearing off. I take Claritin D literally every day in the spring, and it's a 24-hour pill, and it wears off right about the middle of the day. So, bleh, everything's gonna start filling up and then falling out, and it's just going to be gross. So there's going to be sniffling is what I'm getting at. But I was looking at the print layout in Returning the Favor, and I laid that out like I was writing a blog post on the internet, where you leave a space between paragraphs. I didn't indent. So it looks like crap, the prose layouts. And now I want to go back and eventually I want to collect all of this short literary fiction and narrative nonfiction and poetry into one volume. But it's on the list, and I've got other stuff to write before that happens. Before that project, which probably will make me absolutely no money, ever happens. This piece is called The Deflowering of the Baptist Deacon's Daughter. We sang Van Morrison in the key of Budweiser and drank shit. I wrote it and I can't read it. We're going to try that again. The Deflowering of the Baptist Deacon's Daughter. We sang Van Morrison in the key of Budweiser and danced barefoot in the moonlight, kissed like it was breakfast with our toes in the creek while I wrapped you in my faded blue jean jacket. We woke up in the grass wearing dewdrops and smiles, staggered drunk on each other back to that rust bucket Chevy with the cracked vinyl seats. You jumped out giggling at the mailbox so Daddy wouldn't see me in the daylight, and I burned rubber back to the main road, dodging bird-shot big brothers and the highway patrol. I've never done any of those things. Really. I haven't. Promise. This piece was actually nominated for a Pushcart Prize by an online literary journal. God, I can't even remember the name of the journal. It's been that long. The way the Pushcart Prize works is anyone who publishes a literary magazine can submit nominations. So every year there are hundreds of poems that are nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and I was happy to be one of them that year. I didn't make the finalists list. I certainly don't think the poem deserves all that, but it was some nice recognition from the editors of this magazine that they thought enough of it to be one of the few pieces that they could put forward that year for recognition. It's called Dancing with Fireflies. She stands by the edge of the yard, barely out of earshot. At least that's what she's pretending, just like I'm pretending not to notice she's pushing boundaries again, and whirls round and around, sturdy baby fat legs grapevining on her twirling tippy toes, blonde curls dancing in the dusklight until she collapses, wreathed in giggles and grass stains, laughing up at the starlight, star-bright first stars she sees tonight, dancing with a million dizzy fireflies as the world slowly ends its whirligig trip through the Milky Way, and everything settles on right side up again. I have a bunch of nieces and a nephew, and watching them grow up was alternately hilarious and heartwarming and crazy making. So there's a lot of that in a lot of these. Oh, this is a fun one. I don't remember what book this image came from. I think it was a Stephen King book that talked about selling red letter Bibles, and a Bible salesman that was the biggest seller, and he could always get people to buy the upsell to the white leather version that's gold embossed. And yeah, I don't remember. It might have been It might have been Prince of Tides. That might have been something that the narrator's grandfather did. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I think it was from Prince of Tides. That's a big piece of the inspiration. That and contemporary praise worship bands. This is called Of My Understanding. He's a Stratocaster Messiah, long hair swirling round his tattooed shoulders as he wails the word at the wasted youth who scream with the tear-streaked cheeks of the truly untouched. She is the shepherd, swaddled in cardboard, shivering beside the dumpster, faith discarded like yesterday's meatloaf, crying for a piece of salvation or just a promise of resurrection. He's the God of his understanding, all turned out in pinstripes, a pocket square, with his envelope bulging, ostentatious in the plate, greasy grin and clammy handshake for the pastor on his frantic way down the steps for kickoff. She's the trinity of love, innocence, and the suffering of little children, with her blonde hair covering the scars from Mommy didn't mean to, and Daddy gets angry when he drinks. She smiles undimmed and leaves a flower on the lady sleeping in the alley so she can have a pretty beside her when she wakes. I got some things I'm working through with organized religion. 10 years and counting, and I ain't worked through them all yet. This is called Chelsea for Gina. It is the piece that won me the poetry contest that I entered, and it's based off of a story that Gina Stewart from the band Doubting Thomas and Jones Lee and Volatile Baby, who's also a local actress here and a friend of mine, she told this story about a song that she played at an event we were at together, I guess about 2009. And I went home that night and wrote this poem and came back and read it the next night because it was a 2-night event. And then this piece won the Charlotte Writers Club Poetry Contest that year. It's about the Chelsea Hotel in New York City. Chelsea for Gina. I don't see him dragging a stolen Food Line grocery cart uphill loaded down with a hot water heater and cans picked up off the side of the road, heading for the recycling center, hoping for just enough to get another bottle to get me through the night. I don't see her pay for a corn dog and courtesy cup of ice with pennies and haul the 7 mismatched garbage bags that make up her whole world out into the heat of the August afternoon. I don't see him sitting in the rain, mumbling at nothing and carving names into his wiry limbs with a rusty jackknife while his own blood drips pink and runs off down the sidewalk, puddling for a second around my Echo loafers. But I see you, kneeling in front of a wild-eyed Walt Whitman madman to say, "Hey man, you all right?" I look at you and you duct tape Doc Martens thrift store Dickies work shirt, maybe $1.50 in your own pocket while you kneel on the wet concrete to touch the face of a stranger. And for a minute, before the world washes my vision away again, I see. I still like that one. I mentioned that as the youngest child of older parents, I grew up dealing with relatives dying and older relatives dying and the Southern death rituals, and it pisses me off. Death pisses me off. It makes me viscerally angry. My job, my life, my entire adulthood has been about creating things. And because I'm unsure of my faith and unsure of what happens after we die, death is a cessation of things. So it makes me angry. And this is a poem about being angry at someone who's died. It's called Rapture Interrupted. I don't want to hear about the love in your fingertips while I try to hold your life inside my hands and a dirty t-shirt. I don't want to kneel here in the doorway of some shitbox motel in Alabama with your life smeared all over my jeans because you couldn't leave well enough alone. I don't want to answer the goddamn questions from fat men in off-the-rack suits who pass for cops in Mayberry about why you were here in the first place. I just want my stupid baby brother with the smile kissed by angels and the power of God Almighty in his hands to get up off this jizz-stained carpet and walk away for once from the screams on the other side of the wall. I think that tells the story. I don't think that, I don't think I have to tell the story that it's not true. But, oh, sorry, gotta shift a little. I'm sitting on a stump and my ass is asleep. So a little while back, I told a story about the Red Letter Bible, and then I read the wrong poem. This is that poem that I'm pretty sure came from Prince of Tides. And somebody in the comments tell me, because I don't remember. It's called Salvation for Sale. And I've got one more after this, but this will be the next to the last one. He was salvation for sale in a seersucker coat and a Panama hat, tearing up the back roads, bringing the word of Jesus in red gospel letters to shotgun shacks with wax paper windows and a loose step on the porch. He sold God on the installment plan and preached the virtue of the embossed, personalized edition to illiterate cracker sharecroppers with twice-patched young'uns and barefoot haggard wives. He drank only sweet tea while he worked and only Old Crow while he drove that big old Cadillac with a trunk full of Rapture and a shoebox full of gospel cassettes rattling on the rusted floorboards. Some nights, when the lightning danced beneath the distant clouds, he walked through the rain, looking for God in a red-letter sky with jagged gold initials. Yeah, that's the one I meant to do. Oh, I lied. I'm gonna do two more. This one, because I want to give a shout out specifically to another incredible songwriter who is still with us and has a new album out. His name's David Childers. He's local to the Charlotte region here in North Carolina, and he's amazing. He wrote a song called The Prettiest Thing, and the Avett Brothers covered it and have played it live a lot. So if you're an Avett Brothers fan, you may have heard of it. This is called Sunset Song. She sat on the hood of her big brother's truck, drinking warm Miller Lite and laughing while he strummed that beat-up Martin guitar his daddy left behind. She leaned back on the windshield. He sang off-key Dylan songs, scuffed cowboy boots tapping time on the dents as her beer in the daylight blazed out in crimson purple glory. He looked up at her, a backlit angel with a sunset halo and cut-off shorts, and knew this was the sweetest thing he'd ever see. Go buy a David Childers album. My favorite is Room 23, but your mileage may vary. This is the title poem to the book. It's called Red Dirt Boy. And if you've read my book, Amazing Grace, this will feel very familiar, because that book and this poem come from the same place. And by that, I don't just mean my kind of sick and twisted imagination. I mean my home. This and that book very much come from me and what makes me who I am at my core. So thank you if you've watched this far. I appreciate it. This isn't what we usually do here on The Writing Life. I'll get back to more about publishing tips next week, maybe, I hope. And I'll probably still tape outside though, because I kind of like it. This is more outside time than I've spent in a long time. But this is Red Dirt Boy. I am the red dirt boy running barefoot down the gravel road in the middle of summer to mama's house, fighting and throwing dirt clods at my cousin, 'cause it's my turn to sit on the ice cream churn. And you done it last time, and I'm gonna get a switch for your ass if you don't straighten up. I am sun-bleached hair and brown skin splashing in the creek, catching crawdaddies in a jar and throwing mud pies at each other while we walk through the thistles home, dodging cow pies and horseflies, hitching a ride on the tailgate of Uncle Ed's pickup truck, bouncing across the ruts in the hayfield. I am a dirty bar of ivory soap on the window ledge round back of the house by the spigot, scrubbing all that red mud off my feet into puddles before Mama'd let me back in the house. I'm that skinny little shirtless boy drinking out the garden hose that never remembers to let it run cold first before he spits out a big mouthful of hot green plastic tasting water. I'm cut off shorts and flip-flops, eating watermelon off a butter knife with just a little dash of salt to go with the sweet, sweet juicy of every bite after that big old melon's been sitting in the icebox all afternoon. I'm sitting on the porch listening to my sister sing while Daddy picks a little on the front porch as the dog day storms roll in. Thunder means God's bowling, and rain when the sun shines means the devil's beating his wife. But who'd marry the devil anyway? I'm home. I'm safe in Mama's arms while the lightning dashes across the horizon. I'm home. I'm the smell of wood smoke in January with a load of firewood in my arms. I'm more than a memory that flashes like fireflies in Granny's azaleas, gone like mud puddles from yesterday's rain in the glare of all those tomorrows. I'm home. Thank you. I'll be back next week. And in the meantime, y'all be good to one another. Take care of one another.